Okay, so how many of you out there actually spend time thinking about like the individual muscles in your legs? I mean, they're there, they do their thing, but today we're going deep on one that you use every single day, the vastus lateralis.
The Vastus
It's
Lateralis.
kind of a mouthful, right? We'll call it the VL for short, I think.
Yeah, the
And
VO.
believe me, this muscle, it's more than just, part of your leg. Understanding the VL, it's like getting a secret key to understanding how your whole body moves and balances and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, think of it as a real powerhouse, right? It's one of those muscles, a real workhorse in your thigh. It's part of the quadriceps group. And what we're going to do today in this deep dive is we're going to really look not just at what it does and where it is, but how it's connected to your nervous system, how it affects your posture.
Oh, the nervous system angle. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We've gone through a bunch of research and there's so much to it. We've looked at the anatomy of this muscle, we've looked at studies on how it grows, how it changes as we age, even how it's involved in, controlling your movements.
And as we do here on the deep dive, right?
Yeah.
We dig through all this stuff, detailed anatomy, all this research, and we pull out the coolest, most important parts. So
Exactly.
you don't have to wade through a medical textbook, right?
Exactly.
All right, so let's just start with the basics. Where exactly is this VL muscle hiding out?
Okay, so picture this. You've got your thigh bone, your femur, right? Now, the vastus lateralis, it originates from a bunch of different points on that femur. It's not just like one little
Oh, wait,
spot.
wait, multiple points.
Yeah. So it's a kind of like it's gripping onto this bone in a few key areas. So you've got the intertrochanteric line, which is like a ridge near your hip joint. You've got the greater trochanter, that's that bony bump you can feel on the side of your upper thigh.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Then you've got the lateral aspect of the linea aspera, which is like a more prominent ridge that runs down the back of the femur. Then there's the gluteal tuberosity near your buttock, and even a sheet of connective tissue called the lateral intermuscular septum, which basically helps separate muscles in your thigh. So it's really anchored in there.
Wow, so it's not just hanging out by a thread. It's really got a good grip on that femur.
Absolutely.
Okay, so then all those muscle fibers, I mean, they're originating from all these different points up on the femur. Where do they all end up? How does that connect down to, the lower leg to actually make movement happen?
All right, so all those fibers, they come together, right, as they head down your thigh, and they form a tendon, and this tendon is super strong. It's called the quadriceps tendon. Now, this tendon, it goes over your patella, that's your kneecap, and acts kind of like a pulley, and then continues down as the patellar tendon to attach to a bony bump below your knee on your shin bone called the tibial tuberosity.
Okay, so it's like one straight shot from the femur over the kneecap down to the tibia.
Yeah, exactly. Direct line to pull, and it gives you that power to straighten your leg.
It's like a system of ropes almost.
Yeah, like a really strong set of ropes all pulling together.
Now, I remember reading that there's this tough outer layer, this casing around the VL. What's that all about?
Ah, you're talking about the fascia lata.
Hmm.
So think of it like a really strong supportive stocking, right? It wraps around all the muscles in your thigh, gives them structure, helps transmit
Like the
forces.
compression sleeve, but natural.
Exactly. Yeah. And what's really interesting is on the outer side of your thigh, this fascia lata, it thickens up to form what's known as the iliotibial tract.
Ah, the IT band.
The IT band, yep. You've probably heard of it, maybe even felt it if you've ever had any tightness there.
Oh, yeah, the IT band. It's definitely notorious.
It is, and your VL is right there inside that fascial layer, nice and snug.
Okay, so nestled in there with its tough outer layer. Now, what about the muscles around it? Who are the VL's neighbors in there?
Okay, so anatomically speaking, let's start on the outside. Laterally, the VL is right underneath that subcutaneous tissue that's the stuff just beneath your skin. Now, if we move to the inside, medially, and we look up near the hip at the level of that greater trochanter, the VL sits right next to the femur itself and another one of the quadriceps muscles called the vastus intermedius, or V's for short.
So another quad muscle right there next to it.
Exactly. And then towards the front and inside, anteromedially, it's buddies with the rectus femoris. That's the most superficial of the four quadriceps muscles. And then finally, let's go to the back and inner side, posteromedially, again at that greater trochanter level. Here, it's separated from the sciatic nerve and the biceps femoris, which is one of your hamstring muscle.
So it's got the quads in front and the hamstrings in the back.
Yeah, exactly. And all of this is separated by that lateral intermuscular septum, which we talked about before, remember? One of the VL's origin points.
Oh, right, 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 the septum. It seems like it's doing a lot more than just giving the VL a place to anchor.
Yeah, for sure. It acts like this barrier, right? It's separating the VL and the other anterior thigh muscles from the hamstrings in the posterior compartment. And you know what else? It creates what surgeons call an internervous plane.
Internervous plane. What is that
So
exactly?
it's basically an anatomical landmark, and it's super important because it allows surgeons to navigate along this plane during surgery in the thigh.
So they can avoid hitting important stuff.
Exactly, minimizing the risk of damaging major nerves like that big sciatic nerve.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not just some random piece of connective tissue. It actually has a really important function, even in surgery.
Exactly.
All right, so we've got a good sense of where the VL lives, who its neighbors are. Now let's talk about what it actually does.
Yeah.
The physiology, the functions of this muscle.
Okay, so the primary function of the vastus lateralis, it's knee extension. So basically straightening your leg.
Okay, so every time I stand up.
Every time you stand up, every time you kick a ball, every time you take a step, your VL is firing.
Really? So it's active even in just regular walking.
Absolutely crucial
Hmm.
for all those everyday movements.
Wow, it really is a workhorse.
It is. And you know what else? It works together with another quad muscle to keep your knee nice and stable.
Oh yeah, the sources mentioned that. Which muscle was it?
The vastus medialis, the VM. It's on the
Mhm.
inner side of your thigh. And together, these two muscles, they stabilize your patella, your kneecap, and that whole knee joint as you move. It's like a dynamic duo working together to make sure everything moves smoothly and you don't, have any wobbly knees.
I like the sound of that, a dynamic duo for knee stability.
Yeah,
And they're both part of that big quadriceps tendon, right? That goes over the kneecap.
exactly. So the VL, along with the VM and the vastus intermedius, they all contribute to this quadriceps tendon. Think of it like they all kind of blend their muscle fibers into this broad sheet of connective tissue.
They join forces.
Yeah, they join forces to create this strong connection to the patella. And, it's not just about attaching to the top of the kneecap. Extensions of this sheet-like structure from both the VL and the VM spread out to the sides of the patella, and that forms what's called the patellar retinaculum.
Okay, the retinaculum, and what does that do?
So imagine this. Your knee is bending and straightening,
All right.
right? The retinaculum, it's like guide ropes on either side of the kneecap. It makes sure that your patella tracks properly in that groove on your femur, prevents it from, going off track.
So it keeps everything aligned.
Exactly. And these retinacular fibers, they go on to insert onto the tibial condyles, those rounded ends of your shin bone at the knee, and they become part of the anterior capsule of the knee joint.
Oh.
So it's providing even more support and stability to that whole area.
Wow, so it's not just power. The VL is really involved in the fine-tuning, the mechanics of that whole knee joint.
It is. It really is.
Now, this was interesting. The source mentioned that some people might have slightly different variations in their VL structure. What's that about?
Right. So in about 60% of people, the vastus lateralis at its lower end, where it attaches, might have two distinct parts. So you've got the vastus lateralis long head, the VLO, and the vastus lateralis obliquus, or the VLO. They're usually separated by a little bit of fat or connective tissue.
So it's like two subdivisions within the VL.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
do they both do the same thing?
They both contribute to knee extension, but the VLO, because it has a more angled, more oblique attachment to the patella, it seems to play a bigger role in controlling patellar tracking and providing that stability, especially when you're almost fully straightening your leg, that final bit of extension.
But that last little push to lock the knee straight.
Exactly. And the angle at which these two heads insert, it can vary a lot from person to person.
Mhm.
So the VLL, it usually inserts at an angle of about 10 to 17 degrees. But the VLO, its angle can range from 26 degrees up to 41 degrees.
Wow, so quite a big difference in that angle.
Yeah, and that probably contributes to why some people's knees are more stable than others.
It's fascinating, right? These subtle differences in anatomy that can actually have a noticeable impact on how we move.
It is, and it's just a reminder that there's so much variation from one person to the next.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the anatomy, we've talked about the functions of the VL. Now, how does it all work? How does it get the signal to contract? And where does it get the fuel it needs to do all this amazing stuff? So let's talk about nerves and blood supply.
Okay, so the vastus lateralis gets its nerve signals from branches of the femoral nerve. These are penetrating muscular branches that originate from nerve roots L2, L3, and L4 in your spinal cord. L3 is the main player, the predominant one.
So it's connected directly to the spinal cord.
Yeah, directly. And that's how your brain communicates with the VL. So when you think, okay, straighten my leg, that electrical signal, it travels down the femoral nerve, tells the VL to contract.
It's like the command center sending orders.
Yeah, exactly. Now, for fuel For that energy, the VL gets its main blood supply from the lateral circumflex femoral artery. It has three branches, ascending, transverse, and descending. And these guys, they deliver all the oxygen-rich blood, all those nutrients, to the muscle tissue. Now, the VL also gets a little bit of extra blood supply from what are called perforating arteries.
Like a backup?
Yeah, like a backup system. They come from the deep artery of the thigh, which is also known as the profunda femoris.
Okay, so it's got a main supply and a backup just in case.
Yeah, it's a hardworking muscle and needs a good supply.
And what about getting rid of waste products? Venous drainage, I think it's called.
Yeah, so the venous drainage, it's kind of like the arterial supply, but in reverse. Deoxygenated blood is carried away from the VL through perforating veins that connect into the deep femoral vein, the lateral femoral circumflex vein, and other unnamed veins that eventually drain into the superficial veins of the leg.
So it's like a whole network of roads, but for blood.
Yeah, exactly. And it ensures that everything gets delivered where it needs to go and waste products are taken away.
All right, so we've got the nerves, we've got the blood supply. Now, this is where it gets really interesting for me. The connection between the VL, your nervous system, and your posture. It's all connected, right? How does the VL contribute to our movement control and our balance?
Well, the fact that it's innervated by the femoral nerve, which comes from your lumbar spine, that just highlights that direct connection between the muscle and your central nervous system. And this connection is so important for everything from basic movements like walking to, just standing upright, maintaining balance.
Can you give me some specific examples of how this plays out when we move?
Okay, so let's take walking. As your leg swings forward before your foot touches the ground, the VL contracts. It's preparing your knee for that impact of landing.
So it's already working before the foot even hits the ground.
Absolutely, it's getting ready. And then when your heel strikes the ground, the whole quadriceps group, including the VL, it absorbs those forces.
It's like a shock absorber.
Yeah, it's crucial for absorbing that impact. And then as you shift your weight onto that leg, the VL continues to contract, helping you support your body weight and control that movement.
So it's not just about pushing off, it's about controlling the landing too.
Exactly. And then think about walking downhill or going downstairs. In these situations, the VL actually lengthens as it contracts. It's called an eccentric contraction.
So it's working even when it's getting longer.
Yeah, and it's crucial for slowing you down and providing that stability. It prevents you from, just collapsing under gravity.
Like a braking system?
Exactly, a braking system for your leg.
And all of this ties into posture, right? Especially in the lower limbs.
Absolutely. So the VL, along with the other quads, by constantly adjusting its level of contraction based on information it's getting from your muscles, joints, even your inner ear, it helps keep your knee and hip joints stable. And those joints, they're fundamental to your lower limb alignment and balance. Now, our sources didn't really talk specifically about YUGAMI, which is a concept often related to postural imbalances.
Right.
But, it's pretty clear that if your VL is weak or imbalanced, it can definitely mess with your overall posture.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like if one of the main supports in a building is weak, the whole structure is compromised.
Exactly. A strong, well-functioning VL is key for healthy lower limb mechanics, and that translates to good posture.
Makes sense. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the research that we dug up. One study really caught my eye, the one about the VL and how it relates to overall quadriceps muscle growth after training.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting one. So in this study, they were trying to figure out which of the 4 quad muscles is the best indicator of overall quad growth from strength training. They had people do an 8-week program, mostly leg presses and half squats, and they used ultrasound to measure the cross-sectional area, the CSA, of all 4 quad muscles before and after.
The CSA, that's like a measure of how big the muscle is, right?
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
a good way to assess muscle size.
So did all the muscles grow the same amount?
Interestingly, no. They saw significant increases in the CSA of the total quadriceps, but specifically in the vastus lateralis, the vastus intermedius, and the vastus medialis. But the rectus femoris, the one at the front of your thigh, it didn't really change much.
That's so surprising. I would have thought the rectus femoris would be a major player.
Yeah, you'd think so, but it seems like for those particular exercises, the other 3 quads were doing most of the work.
Interesting. So the VL, the 6, and the VM were the real stars of the show.
Yeah, they were the ones undergoing the most hypertrophy, the most growth.
And what was really interesting is that they found that the changes in the VL and the VL were really good predictors of overall quad growth.
Right, so if you see those two muscles getting bigger, it's a pretty good sign that your whole quadriceps muscle group is growing.
That's really useful to know, especially for people who are really focusing on building leg strength and size.
Absolutely. It gives you a good idea of whether your training is working.
Makes sense. Now, another thing that I found really fascinating was the research on how the VL changes as we age.
Oh, yeah, that's a really important aspect to consider. So, in this study, they looked at a big group of healthy adults from 18 years old all the way up to 70.
That's a big range.
It is,
Yeah.
and they used ultrasound to measure different characteristics of the VL, like its thickness, the pennation angle, which is the angle of the muscle fibers, and the fascicle length, which is how long the muscle fibers are.
So they were looking at the muscle's internal structure.
Exactly, and what they found was pretty interesting. They saw this negative correlation between age and a lot of those key indicators.
So as people got older, their VLs changed.
Yeah, so as people got older, their VL tended to get thinner, the pennation angle decreased, and the fascicle length got shorter. Basically, the structure of the muscle was changing.
And did they connect that to any functional changes like in strength or mobility?
Yeah, they found that these changes in the VL were also linked to lower grip strength and worse performance on things like a chair rise test.
Oh, wow. So these changes in the muscle actually translate to real-world functional differences.
Exactly. It's not just about the muscle itself, it's about how those changes affect your ability to move and function.
And at what age did these changes start to become noticeable?
So the biggest differences were between the youngest group, the 18 to 29-year-olds, and the older groups, particularly those over 50. It really highlighted that as we age, our muscles can change quite a bit.
It's a good reminder to really pay attention to our muscle health as we get older.
It is, but the good news is the study also found that staying physically active can help to offset some of those age-related changes.
Oh, that's great news.
It is. Regular exercise, it can make a big difference in maintaining muscle health throughout your life.
That's really encouraging to hear. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about with the VL is this idea of variability within the muscle itself. This really blew my mind. Tell me about this.
Okay, so in this study, they really went all out. They took up to 10 biopsies from a single vastus lateralis muscle.
10 biopsies from one muscle.
Yeah, they were taking samples from different spots along the length of the muscle and even comparing the left and right legs.
Wow, so they were really looking at the fine details.
Yeah, they wanted to see how consistent different characteristics are within the muscle itself. You know, a lot of studies only take one biopsy, but they wanted to see if there's actually a lot of variation within the muscle.
That makes sense. And what did they find?
So for things like the percentage of different muscle fiber types, the size of the fibers, and the composition of those myosin-heavy chains, they found quite a bit of variability.
Really? So different parts of the same muscle could have different types of fibers.
Yeah, and different sizes. It wasn't like there was a clear pattern. It was more random.
So one part of my VL could be slightly different from another part of the same VL?
Exactly. But one thing that was pretty consistent was the myonuclear content, the number of nuclei in the muscle fibers.
Oh, so that was more uniform.
Yeah, much more consistent across different samples.
Interesting. And what about those super fast type IIX fibers? Were they evenly distributed?
Actually, no. They were pretty rare in these healthy individuals, and their distribution was random. Just a small percentage of the biopsies contained them.
So not as common as some people might think.
Yeah, it seems like they're not a major player in the average person's VL.
Okay, so what's the main takeaway from all of this?
I think the big message is that we can't assume that a single biopsy tells us everything about a muscle. There's a lot of variability within the VL, and that means we need to be careful about drawing conclusions based on just one sample.
Yeah, it really highlights the complexity of muscle tissue.
It does. Muscles are incredibly intricate.
All right, so we've really gone deep on the vastus lateralis today. We've talked about where it is, what it does, how it's connected to the nervous system, how it changes as we age. It's been a wild ride.
It has. It's amazing how much there is to know about just one muscle.
It is. So for our listeners out there, just to recap, the vastus lateralis, it's a key player in knee extension and stability. It's got those strong attachments to your femur, it works with the other quads to control movement, and it's intricately linked to your nervous system.
And remember, the VL and the V6, they can be good indicators of overall quadriceps growth from training.
Right. But like all muscles, the VL can change as we age. It might get thinner, the structure might change a bit, but exercise can help to keep it healthy.
And don't forget that variability within the muscle itself. Different parts of the VL can have slightly different characteristics.
Yeah, it's not just a uniform block of muscle. It's much more complex than that.
It really is.
So the next time you're walking, running, or just standing up, think about your vastus lateralis. It's working hard to keep you moving.
It is, and maybe this deep dive has sparked some new questions for you.
Right, like how do different types of exercises affect different parts of the VL? Or what other hidden complexities are lurking within our muscles?
There's always more to explore.
Always. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.